This ZeroNow program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
In today's rapidly changing world, the safety of our students is the top priority. But are we truly prepared for every emergency that may arise? Emergencies can happen at any time, and they demand a coordinated response. Join experts Jeff Kelly from Mutualink, Montgomery College's Robert Mueck, and Kirk Arthur from Microsoft in our conversation, Collaborating for School Emergency Response. And then I'm going to introduce our distinguished guests of panelists here that are joining this conversation. First, I want to introduce Robert Mueck, Bob Mueck. Hey, Bob, from Montgomery College. Bob, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick background and on yourself and your relation to the topic.
Sure. So I don't look like I'm that old, but I've been doing higher ed public safety for about 38 years now. I had to add that up in my head this morning and might have sprouted the gray hair in the process. And I'm now at a community college. I started at the University of Maryland, a large public institution. Then after I retired, went to the George Washington University, a large private institution, then to St. John's College in Annapolis, a small private liberal arts college. And now I'm at a community college and pretty much rounded out my higher education experience. But I'm also here in the state of Maryland with the active assailant interdisciplinary working group, where I work on this topic at a state level.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. I'm glad that you could join us. Next, we have Jeff Kelly, Jeff Kelly from Mutualink. Hey, Jeff, welcome to Conversations, and just a quick background, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to join this panel. Jeff Kelly, I come from a law enforcement background out of the state of Rhode Island. I've been 14 years with Mutualink, specifically 7 years, the last 7 years, in the school space, making schools safer. You started out in Florida, worked with the legislature to pass a Lissa's law, which then mandates panic buttons as well as SROs in every school. My position today is Director of K-12 Technology Solutions on a national level, and I'm anxious to begin the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Glad you're here. And last but not least, Mr. Kirk Arthur from Microsoft. Welcome, Kirk.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, everyone. Kirk Arthur with Microsoft, and I'm part of our worldwide government industry team. I lead a team of former government officials driving innovation and how does technology help support mission. I've been here 9 years. I joined from the U.S. Secret Service. I was a special agent for a little over 15 years, so field time, headquarters, presidential detail, then e-crimes. And for me, through the National Threat Assessment Center that the Secret Service has, lots of good knowledge and insights on pre-attack indicators for school violence, as similar to what we would see for ASAS. And so, really excited about ZeroNow, the partnership, and the discussion.
Awesome, thank you, Kirk. And I just want to remind our participants, if you have a question for Kirk, Jeff, or Robert, please use the Q&A button, and we'll take those either during the program or typically do about halfway through. And then we've got some questions that came in from our participants. So let's take a look at that poll result here. Okay, so let's see here. So about 33% use walkie-talkies or two-way radios. 24% don't have an alternative communication method. Okay, that's certainly a key factor. So Jeff, I mean, what does this tell you? Are you surprised by these results, Jeff?
Well, I'm actually encouraged that there's as many walkie-talkies in play as there are. Most schools think they quote unquote check the box by providing the mass notification tool. I mean, we're seeing that on a national level, state by state, district by district, where many of the panic button applications, fob devices, so forth and so on, are getting a footprint in the schools for obvious reasons. But mass notification is only one part of the equation. We've chatted before where the four tenets of what we do, each of us, is first threat assessment, second is mass notification, third is situational awareness, and then the fourth is reunification. And one could argue if you don't have communications in at least three of those four, you've got a problem that you're going to have to answer for.
No, absolutely. And Jeff, what's the heading? So what parties should be involved with a coordinated emergency response at a school?
Well, first and foremost, it's imperative that the superintendent of schools have a yearly meeting with the fire chief, the police chief, the emergency management director, who often gets left out of the equation. That this group comes together, and the first decision they have to make is, in the event of a crisis or emergency, who's in charge? You see a lot of finger pointing after the fact. Well, if there's a clear delineation of quote unquote who's in charge, then when people show up on the scene, then you've got a true collaboration. And then beyond that, if you don't introduce what technologies you've brought to the forefront at the school level with the fire chief, police chief, emergency management director, they don't know that you have those capabilities. So again, it's imperative that these professionals come together and determine, what tools they have and when to use them.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Jeff on that. And for me, it's the decision makers, the leadership have got to be involved, but it has to be more than just the leadership. You've got to get really the whole community, the whole educational community has to be involved in this so that everyone understands what the role is.
So Bob, who does take the lead then? I mean, is there a hierarchy when it comes to collaborating with a school or campus, first responders, law enforcement?
Right. So the big thing I would say is a unified command, and it's understanding the role of the school superintendent or college president versus the incident commander, because the incident commander will deal with the incident in the field with the responding agencies that come, and they're going to deal with the incident. But the campus leadership or the school leadership, they're not focusing on the incident. They're focusing on the impact that incident has on the institution. Can they continue their academic endeavor? Do they got to move classes, cancel classes, things of that nature? So that's part of this whole equation is everyone needs to understand their role and kind of stay in their lane so they understand how it's going to coordinate.
And Kirk, I mean, so we have a number of folks that may not be as well versed on the different aspects of emergency response. So unified command, Bob mentioned unified command. What does that mean to a lay person?
Well, I think it's comms, right? So you take in that reactionary posture, and you do have to have who is in charge. It's got to be a single voice calling the shots till incidents isolated. But all these things that Jeff and Bob are calling out, it's happening in tandem, right? Like it is, if you're behind it, it's going to be very difficult to catch up until that threat is mitigated. And then the media kicks in, social media, all these other things that quickly expands kind of out of control. That messaging piece, even if it's an unsafe scene, maybe a school bus is inbound with additional students. How do you redirect that so you're not contributing to a mass casualty event? Listen, it's happened in real time. If you haven't drilled it, if you haven't tabletopped it and actually gone through the exercise on a regular basis, accounting for staff turnover over school years, having teachers and principals and administrators and law enforcement, first responders, like everyone should have a familiarity on what that response posture is, using whether it's walkie-talkies, whatever digital tools they are, a familiarity in the day-to-day. So when something bad does happen, you're not trying to, relearn something new. You're just executing against that. So really important for everything.
And you mentioned, tabletop exercises. So Jeff, I mean, I know you've been involved with this in various facets. So who actually, going back to taking the lead, so who actually says, hey, we're going to organize a tabletop exercise with our school, with our school district, with our high school, with our campus? Who actually, well, let's talk K through 12 specifically. What role is that? Who does that?
Well, I mean, it's this is an interesting topic because we see it very, very often where school districts or even statewide legislatures will pass legislation that says that you have to have a drill or an exercise once a month. So, I mean, now you've got drill overload, right? And some of them actually have, we have to do a reunification drill, once a year or twice a year. That's totally unnecessary. That's where, as Kirk and Bob correctly pointed out, if all the parties come together and sit at a table and they talk this out and they whiteboard it out, I'm for reunification once every other year, maybe once every third year, with a tabletop once, every other year. It's not necessarily the kids that need to know what to do, but that's age appropriate, right? It's important that the teachers and staff know exactly what to do. I mean, what we see on a national level is school districts and superintendents are not giving enough time for the teachers and staff to be correctly and appropriately trained in a moment of crisis. What is their roles and responsibilities? What should they do? So again, if they come together and they decide that, hey, we don't need a drill every month, we need one every 3 months. And again, they have to be age appropriate, or else you're going to have parents in an uproar. You got to get buy-in, and it's been said a couple of times already. You need community buy-in. The one for the first grade of kindergarten has to be totally different than the 11th or 12th grader. But again, I can't emphasize enough that if the group of the right people come to a room together on a yearly basis, introduce each other, and then formulate the plan for the following 12 months.
Yeah, or I think building on top of that too, because you don't want the fatigue, but you also don't want it to be so new, because you want a little level of desensitization for teachers, administrators. It's not their day-to-day. Like a police officer is used to conflict and those types of things. It can't be so fresh that they just shut down, right? They need to be thinking on their feet and reacting and getting that level of confidence through those types of exercises, so they at least know what the first or second step is, so they're contributing to a more positive outcome versus, maybe contributing to a less than positive outcome. So I think having that balance, and it's going to vary by personalities at school districts and everybody in between, and just the appetite for it.
And if I can add just one last thing, is listen to your staff. They have some really good ideas. Some of them are going to be oddball. They can't be done. Others are things others haven't thought about. Listen to the people doing that job, because they may actually have ideas that nobody else has thought of.
Jeff.
I can't encourage the audience to check out schoolsafety.gov. There's a questionnaire on there. Every school administrator, school principal should be going to schoolsafety.gov and then doing the questionnaire on if their school, their facility is quote unquote ready. And again, if you contact your local Homeland Security office, they'll come in and do an assessment for you in addition to your local police. Some of us have done assessments where when you leave, you just shake your head. I've seen as simple as no signage or poor signage for visitors to report to the front office. Well, then how do you trespass someone that starts wandering around your school? So, there are minimal steps that are not exceedingly expensive, that can take corrective actions and keep your students and your facilities safer.
You're absolutely correct, and often things that you assume are being done, or you would assume certain things are not being done. So it's important to make sure that all those things are front and center. And Kirk, I appreciate your point about desensitizing and going through drills like fire drills. Nobody gets anxious with fire drills, or very few people get anxious with fire drills nowadays. But what about other types of training and preparedness for students in an environment, like all hazard types of drills? So when something does happen, you're prepared. I think that's an important point.
Yeah, it is. And I saw there's a question from Rick Rarick on the thing about, how do you get, if school leadership's not supportive of the training, how do you get them supportive? Sadly, there's no shortage of peers of those school administrators around the country that have experienced an active shooter scenario in real time. So for me, as much as possible, getting somebody that actually was present during an active shooter, if they come tell their story, their feelings to a reluctant staff, it makes it real and tangible. Because complacency is a big thing. It's hard to work through. It's hard to mitigate. Boy, and no one knows, right? It just happens so quickly. I think getting that piece and some buy-in and some people that have walked that path before, because listen, you're gonna have PTSD afterwards. There's a lot to process. Sadly, these are soldiers that are in conflict overseas. Our school children and our administrators and teachers have some of that same experience, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and to Rick's question as well, we had a conversation a few months ago about the politics of school safety. There's so many dynamics with it, and it is unfortunate when your school leadership refuses to do training, and it's one of those, we always talk about the never hear syndrome, right? You think that nothing will happen here. We're immune to different things. We're immune to weather incidents. We're immune to mass violence. We're immune to all this. It will never happen here. And that's probably the biggest threat to actually securing schools, is overcoming that mindset. And what's interesting, I think it's our generation more or less that has it, because the young generation, I know my kids are in college and a family that are in high school. They don't have that mindset. They assume that something is going to happen. And unfortunately, they grew up in this environment where there is mass violence, and so it's not a matter of it'll never happen here. It's a matter of when will it happen here. And so it's a different mindset, and hopefully it's not a generational factor before things actually do change. I'll get off my soapbox, Bob. Let's let's go back to the whole thing about coordinated response here. And so when it comes to, I know you've got a lot of experience here. So when it comes to actually taking the lead, going back to the lead, where is that plan generated? The actual, we do this, you do that. Let's pull together our resources. Stay in your lanes. Here are the lanes that you need to stay in. Where does that all happen?
Now, often, as Jeff could have alluded to, if you have an emergency manager, usually starts there, right? That's the person that's going to coordinate all the resources to respond to an emergency. You form a committee. You pull in the key stakeholders. You draft an emergency operations plan, and you have them review various components. And it may take a year or so to get through something like that, and then you renew that annually. But generally, if it's not if you don't have an emergency manager, it might be your director of security or public safety that's going to take that charge. But it's got to start somewhere. At the last institution I worked, I had a vice president for business and administration, and she was my champion. She was absolutely fantastic and helping to drive this with the leadership. And so we really made a lot of progress because of her.
No, that's great. And I know we had a question about the challenges to getting buy-in from leadership, but Jeff, are there any other key challenges that schools have encountered when it comes to trying to coordinate emergency response efforts with different stakeholders?
Well, I mean, the first thing is dollars and cents, right? I mean, there hasn't always been funding, right, to provide what's necessary. And again, we've seen that in state by state, right? They'll allocate X amount of dollars, but that only gets you so far. So, I mean, let me just get up on your soapbox for a minute. So in 2017, on January 6th, a gentleman got off a plane at Fort Lauderdale Airport, opened his baggage and baggage claim, took out a pistol and killed 5 people. 2,200 officers responded. They were 8 across for a quarter of a mile. None of them could talk to one another. They had no communications capabilities, no common mission. Let's go to Uvalde. At the Uvalde response, there was 397 responding from 5 different agencies. Who eventually killed the shooter was, Customs and Border Protection. They couldn't talk to one another on disparate radio systems. So it's important that communities come together and say, okay, does police and first responders need to talk to school personnel on their disparate radio systems? Again, my perspective is yes, they do. In a crisis, yes, they do. Does law enforcement A need to talk to law enforcement B, law enforcement C, law enforcement D? In a mutual aid, do their systems allow them to speak to one another? We see it across the country that no, they cannot. And, when you think about 9/11 and now we're 20 plus years beyond that, that's unforgivable. And it's not that the technology doesn't exist. It's that politics shows its ugly head continually. And this needs to stop going forward to keep our community safe.
Kirk, would you like to get on the soapbox next?
I don't know. We often talk about public-private partnerships, and those are key, right? And I think it's, public-public partnerships. Schools have really, my experience, full time as a federal agent, I was a police officer before that. The school kind of had that kind of side eye to, you're a cop, what are you doing up here kind of thing, and very kind of a barrier. Listen, there's ways in technology you can do now to anonymize data, but you can still get the signal, right? We know these kids, for shooters, they exhibit pre-attack indicators. It's about connecting the dots, right? And what I've seen over the years is just that blockage of schools saying, absolutely not, we're not sharing student information. That's not what we're saying. There's signals there. You have students or potential alert mechanisms if you have that healthy relationship. For me, I'd rather see the intervention before something bad happens. So you're not in that reactionary posture. You're actually intervening, getting help and alliance before something bad really happens on that piece of it. So I know it's a slippery slope, very difficult at the local level with politics and whatnot, but we do need to get to that stage, I think, in our society here in the U.S., because to Jeff's point, there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies at the state and local level. Comms is always going to be a challenge. So how could we're always going to kind of work through that, but if we could do the pre-attack stuff, buy some time to intervene, I think we're in a much better position.
And if I can, in both the instances, examples that Jeff gave, incident command didn't happen, right? Didn't happen in Parkland, Florida either. So we keep finding these issues in these after action reviews that just, they're excruciating to me. I read these documents and I want to scream sometimes because it's like policing 101 that we're forgetting what to do.
Well, so you know what's interesting. So I know that this program is this conversation is about collaborating for emergency response, but what about collaborating for emergency prevention? And Kirk touched upon this, with early threat reporting. How do we collaborate before an incident actually occurs? And I know that's not really on the topic here. Maybe it's for another program, but having a threat assessment team, on the school with staff, with SRO, with school psychologists. What role does that play, Jeff? The collaborating for prevention, the big P.
Well, it's truly fascinating. Those in law enforcement will tell you that, hey, we are willing to share anything that works. What doesn't work, you'll never get out of our mouths, right? I will tell you firsthand, having been intimately involved in Florida, going back to 2016, and then watching them go through the process after Parkland, and then the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission, and then legislation. I will tell you quite honestly, they've come the state of Florida in their schools and school safety and security has come 180 degrees, and part of that is, to the point that you were making, is the threat assessment teams. By law, each school district must have a threat assessment team that must meet, monthly or on a regular basis, where they discuss these potential threats, so that you don't have, God forbid, another Nicholas Cruz that horribly slipped through, multiple cracks. So again, Florida being the model has come light years from where they were.
Jeff, then Kirk will jump to you. On that note, a great example, best practice. Jason Stoddard, he's a director of security and safety at Charles County Public Schools, and he holds a weekly Zoom meeting with all the principals. Just could be 30 minutes. Let's talk about safety. What's happening? Let's get ahead of potential issues. That is such an important thing. But that's collaboration. Once again, we're shifting the conversation from response to prevention, which is the goal, because if we can prevent, then we don't have to respond. But I think that's something I definitely would like to share. Sorry, Kirk. You had a thought?
No, I was just going to follow up on, that pre-incident stuff's going to feed into that incident response. If you do the tabletop, you run the exercises, you're going to see where it falls down on the comms, that communication piece, and then collectively, okay, what is a mechanism that we all agree upon that's going to be the communication channel for this, and again across all the stakeholders, and just identifying, so at least you're aware of it. Whether you take mitigating posture for it, it's up to the individual school districts and stuff. But I have teenagers, and every parent's terrified of what's going to happen, and how information is flowed out and flowed in is just problematic right now.
Well, let's talk more about communication. So Jeff, so there's who needs to be communicated with. So you've got your first responders, you have parents, you have students. What are the different stakeholders or folks that are involved in a response, and who should be communicated with, and how should they be communicated with?
So let's talk about the model that was 30 years ago and the model that as it should be today. So not that long ago, there would be reported of an active assailant or a threat matrix at John F. Kennedy School. So the dispatcher would say, hey, car 54, get to the John F. Kennedy School, see what's going on. We get reports of a gunman and so forth and so on. On average, it takes 9 to 15 minutes for car 54 to get to the John F. Kennedy School, find out what's going on, which might take another 15 to 30 minutes, and then report back. With some of the technology like the Mutualink provides, all of this is available to the law enforcement agencies in less than 30 seconds, and in most cases less than 10. And what I mean by that is when they push a panic button of any kind, the walkie-talkie system and the video from that school is right at the lap of the dispatcher or the real-time crime center. So again, in the world that we're in, time equals lives. So that's why this technology is essentially important. And again, if it's Mutualink, that's fine. If you have another technology, but again, mass notification is great, but then what? So even if you use mass notification today, and you don't have the communications ability from the school to the dispatcher, you've got a massive time delay. So it's important that we get to the school using any technology available as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. One of the we always talk about the concept of the most important minute, right? The minute, the second that a threat is detected, how quickly can you automate the response, right? Communicate, automate notifications, to the right people. Different people need to know different things, including the public, letting parents know on Facebook, Twitter, your website, because if the school is not communicating with parents or the media, the students are, they're texting, they're posting to, not Facebook, that's for us older folks, but they're posting on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, hey, something's happening at the school. So making sure that that's all automated. The second aspect is connecting with first responders, right? Like you talk about, Jeff, how quickly can you reach out to and mobilize your first responders, law enforcement, without having to physically dial 911, and actually, do something in order to do that. And then the third aspect is collaborating. So how do you start that unified command? How do you start that communication between all the different parties simultaneously? And Bob, with your experience, how have you used communications with your experience when it comes to an incident response?
So yeah, that's something that we constantly fall down on, and it's just constantly an issue. And I think one of the main problems there is that it's like you said, right, that golden minute. It's that when time is compressed, when you have very little time, it's a crisis, and the decision making in that situation becomes very complicated. And that's where the communication slips out. So your communication among your responding agencies is one thing. Communicating to those at the institution or the school or the college is another thing. Then communicating to the public is a whole nother ballgame. In the age of social media, it just complicates that even more, because sometimes the people involved in the incident are pushing out more information than the responders are because they don't have the information to push out. So that challenge is just ongoing. But dealing with your responders, it all comes back to who do you include in your planning processes? Do you invite them to come to your campus, your school, walk through, invite them with open arms, host them for training, show them the layout so they understand what they're responding to? And then as you develop those relationships, you kind of mitigate some of the communications issues that might come up. To me, it's all about the relationship. The more you have a relationship, the less the communication becomes an issue.
And relationship is the most important thing, and it's free. What's amazing, like we talk about school safety, it starts with the culture. It's about building relationships, where we talked about earlier, having a culture of communication, but it's about relationships. Simple concept. Jeff, you had a thought.
Well, I mean, you mentioned automation, right? It's important to note that last year in a school in Dallas, Texas, just prior to 7 a.m., when staff came on duty, security staff came on duty at 7 a.m., this was 6:35, 6:40 Dallas time. And, a student brandished a gun and started firing. Had they had AI, such as OmniAlert, right, gun identification, it would have automated the entire process and given notification right across the response matrix, including, Dallas police, school district police, so forth and so on. So that's an important component that if you're relying on people and staff, heart rates go up exponentially, where they can't function properly, or they step away from their desk, or they're not on duty yet, right? So that's where the automation comes in.
No, absolutely. And what's, what is important, we talk about getting the stakeholders together, right? Discussing the emergency response. And that's where it's absolutely critical. We've learned this from experience. We mentioned like OmniAlert. When you're under duress and there's a situation, if you have to type in a message in your emergency notification, you are in serious trouble. So having everything pre-scripted, and having your PR person what are we going to tell the public if there's a lockdown, or what are we going to tell students or the classrooms on the smart boards? How are we going to communicate with first responders, law enforcement? Have all of that stuff preloaded, pre-scripted. Even if you don't have all the information, having a holding message, right? We're aware of the situation because, and if folks on this have known, years ago at my kids' schools, there was a lockdown. We didn't hear about it for almost an hour, and it was obviously very weird. But we were hearing from kids, they're tweeting and posting stuff like, "Wow, what's going on here?" Even if you don't know all the details. If you're going to lock down, at least let parents know that, hey, stay home. Do not come to school. We're aware of the situation. We'll provide more information. So Kirk, just kind of switching back gears to communication. So from your perspective, what role does communication have, and what are some ways that schools can optimize communication to collaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I love the main focus on relationships and partnerships, but the comms piece, the good thing is the infrastructure is there, right? We've got cell phones, we have the two-way radios, we have CCTV, we have social media platforms. Like there's a host of things just to leverage and kind of optimize, right? And unify against a common platform that people can share. This is I answered one of the questions on the questions to this group was. This is not, it really is nothing about technology anymore, right? Technology is so advanced right now, especially in the US. This is more about policy, procedures, governance, and a willingness to actually, decide on what are we going to do. And you may never use it. Administrators may say, okay, we're going to do all this stuff, and we're going to drill, and 10 years make it pass. And you may retire and you never had a shooting. Perfect. But the what if scenario, right? And that's where I came from. We always lived with Secret Service. What if this, then what? And what if that, then we're going to do this. And you can't get fatigued from that piece of it. So that comms platform piece is, well, if this goes down, what are we going to do? If we lose repeater towers, okay, how about cellular? What's Wi-Fi? What's mesh look like? Just having those conversations. Again, the day of is not the time to figure out, hey, this fell flat. So being really proactive on that.
Yeah, on that note, Rick got on his soapbox in the chat here about, he states, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. All the emergency operations, the first responder meetings I attended, every single one of them identifies that communications is a revolving issue in emergencies across the world. Why is this continual, and will we ever fix it? Like, why don't we address it? Is it purely it sounds like it's not a technology issue. It's a human issue. We're not willing to take those steps. I mean, Jeff, you deal with this every day. I mean, so how do you address that factor?
Please believe me. In capital letters, it's pure political. The technology exists to merge a handheld radio that any school staff is carrying around directly with a police dispatcher. And again, the only reason that it's not done is, they make up all kinds of reasons, but it's purely political. And there's no reason for it in today's age.
Yeah, just as an example, we had a shooting at a school local here in my county, and it was detected that it was a security officer who has to radio to the front desk because the principal will not let them call 911, right? The front desk is then notifying somebody else who's making the call to 911, who's asking million of questions that they can't answer. They're now calling the security officer by radio when it should have just been that officer making that call to 911 and notifying them, I need help at this location. So yeah, some of the policies and procedures in place, we impede ourselves in our response capabilities.
So going back to we talked about communications and parents. So how can and should schools engage with parents in the community? How much information should be provided at any given time? Do they have a role in this collaboration effort on the response, Jeff?
Well, what I've seen that's been exceedingly successful is, the beginning of every school year, probably the first 30 to 60 days, a school district should have a meeting, and it's a safety and security meeting, and invite your community to come and present, put a presentation together on some of the things you're doing. Don't tell all your secrets, because for obvious reasons, right? But give a broad overview of what the district's policies are. Encourage them to the point that was made by, I think, Kirk or Bob, that, look, if there's an emergency, don't come. Because when you think of mom and dad and grandma and grandpa, depending upon who's responsible for the kid, if you have 1,000 kids at the school, you could very quickly, in an emergency situation, have 4,000 grown-ups trying to retrieve 1,000 kids. And what do you do with all these people? Not to mention, we saw it during Newtown, where rescues couldn't get through, right? So again, if you have this early school year meeting where you outline, then you answer some questions, my experience is that resolves a lot of issues within the community. And then if you do have a crisis, the standard policy should be you communicate with the community within the first 30 minutes, and then every 15 minutes afterwards, even if you're saying, we know, we're working it, even if there's no information, 30, then every 15.
Is there too much communications, Bob? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Absolutely. Too much, possibly, but I think the main thing is engage the parents, just at the very beginning. If higher ed have a parent, there should be a parents association Not every parent's going to belong to that, but the ones that are going to be the ones to show up, they're going to belong to that. Talk to them and talk to them about these exact issues, right? And educate them a little bit on what you can expect to see. If there's officers standing outside the school, that's not because they're reluctant to go in. It's because there are already officers inside and they might be the outer perimeter. So just understanding what they might be seeing may alleviate some of that fear. But yeah, people need to be educated about what they're looking at when they see these kinds of things.
Kirk.
I was just going to say, a couple years ago, I won't shame my kid's school district, but high school on a Friday afternoon, because kids talk, right? And so my wife, I learned on a Friday afternoon that there's some kid who was making an allegation of bringing a gun to school on Monday. School didn't say anything. So we're like, of course, we're hunting and pecking for information, talking to the parents. Ended up, I think half the school didn't show up on Monday, and the school district was really behind the curve. And then the principal ended up sending out kind of a benign message like, oh, we had it under control. There's no information, but we weren't worried about was kind of the undertone. Didn't land well, right? And you lose all sorts of trust in that administrative leadership of that school district because this stuff is very real. It's very tangible. So, I think earlier in the conversation about having those plans, the comms platform, what is that messaging? Man, do not plunk your head in the ground and just hope nothing bad happens. You got to be really progressive, proactive on the comms platform piece of it, for sure.
It's important point that I was actually telling my wife earlier today about, our school, district has a emergency response plan and crisis plan and plans. But the question is it sitting on a shelf or is it actually operationalized, right? And that kind of ties into the automation side of things, because can you, take that emergency response plan and get it operationalized, get people on the same page as far as the different stakeholders when you do get that pull things together. And part of that is that unified command, establishing the unified command. And I just want to go back to one more time, Bob. So what does a unified command look like? Because like I said, we have a number of folks that are participating here that are new to this, and it'd be really helpful to kind of give just a broad perspective. What does that mean? What does it look like? Where is it? Is it in person? Is it virtual?
So it can be virtual, but it's preferred in person. So it'll be your local police, local fire. If EMS is separate, whoever the commanders are, the incident commanders for those responding entities, they'll be together as a huddled up as a group and as incident commanders, maintaining their own policies, their own procedures, but making common decisions, right? If it's a fire scene, the fire chief is going to take the lead in that fire scene, but the other agencies there can then contribute based on what the needs are for the scene. If it's a police scene, say an active shooter, fire chief may be there. It's not a fire scene, but it might involve EMS, triage, warm zone clearing, things of that nature that they may be a part of. But having them there to make those decisions, to understand what resources they bring in that specific incident becomes key. For school officials, you don't need everyone showing up. Whoever that designated or most senior person is, it should be a decision maker, be in unified command on behalf of the school or the campus to make decisions, and they can relay information back to the school superintendent, the college president, and give an understanding of what's going on. But minimize how many you have in there, but each representative agency that responds should have somebody in unified command.
Right. So you don't want to have 50 people all piling that chaos. Jeff.
So we're talking about collaboration. So I recently had the opportunity and I was asked to evaluate a school in their safety and security procedures. So I did this. And in doing my research, as I sat with the principal and his head of security, I came to learn that they were part of again, this was a parochial school. So I came to learn that there were 4 or 5 other parochial schools that were under the same umbrella, if you would. And then during our conversation, it's important to note that, if you do have a crisis at your school, sometimes your staff can be overwhelmed where they're not functioning. So this school in particular then came together after our meeting and brought the other 5 and said, look, if we have a crisis, you send 4, 5, 6 people to my school, because they weren't directly involved in it and they can quote unquote help out. So now as a result, and this goes to the collaboration part, get your partner schools to create first response teams. Make sure you have wristbands, make sure you have proper vests. They understand the roles and responsibilities and how to get there. But that goes to the collaboration aspect of this. And, we've talked about this now for 45 minutes. Again, if you come together the school year and you bring all the stakeholders in and all your team leaders and you whiteboard it out, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Then the first time you see it is not the first time you see it, right? So it gives knowledge and perspective.
Whiteboard it and create your communications, like what needs to happen. Whiteboard it, and once again, operationalizing that right into an automation system. So if this incident, we'll take an all hazards approach, right? If this happens, these people need to know about this. These people need to be contacted and started a communication via mobile devices. This needs to go here, whatever that is. There are technologies, right, to automate, because it is a race against the clock. I mean, as soon as there's that threat detected, whether it's violence or it's a weather related issue, it's a chemical spill in the lab, whatever it is, being able to automate that, what would take 10 minutes takes 10 seconds is absolutely critical. But getting that communication going. Jeff, I want to go back to you real quick. So, I mean, because obviously you've had a lot of experience with it, especially with your work with Mutualink. I mean, is there do you have an example, and all three of you, I'll open up to all three of you as well. Do you have an example of a successful collaboration between different stakeholders in a response? Can take it from theoretical to actual practical application.
I mean, I'll tell you firsthand the pride and joy that I've seen, and I'm proud to tell you this, is Seminole County, Florida. Chief Richard Francis has done a remarkable job. His team, Lieutenant Kelly Martin, Sergeant Kyle Worthington, they have a contingency plan for anything that should pop up, and they practice it. They practice the active shooter. They practice the reunification. Sheriff Dennis Lima, long before Parkland, had at least one SRO in every school and two in the high schools. And again, they put policies and procedures as well as technology in place a full 2 years before Parkland. They are clearly, in my mind, the leader in Florida, if not the country. I am so proud to be affiliated with them and what they've done and accomplished. They are clearly, and again, in capital letters, they are the model.
Wow. I can give you one that's higher ed related, and that's my experience at the University of Maryland. So we had this twice annual event called Maryland Duke basketball, because at the time Maryland belonged to the ACC. And starting about 2001, Maryland got pretty good, the University Terps basketball team, and we began to have civil disturbances that started off as celebrations, but they occasionally became angry, property damage, fires, the whole 9 yards. And we would coordinate with the state police, the county police, and the county park police, be in unified command. And we did that for 13 years for every home game and an away game. Maryland has since gone to the Big Ten. There's no longer that rivalry, so all that's died off. But the more you do it, the better you get. And we really had that down to a science. But that's experience, right? And that's why you exercise. That's why you do exercise, is because you don't want to live through the real thing. You want to make mistakes in an exercise and learn from that rather than in an actual event.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Bob. Let's take a few questions. We have about 15 minutes left, just under 15 minutes. So Hank Morton asks, have you used CEPTED as a strategy for assessments? And have you seen improvements using CEPTED because it involves the entire school community and the built environment? Does anyone have any thoughts on CEPTED and how that plays into pulling the school community? Bob?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest challenge that I find right now is buildings that are LEED certified. So there is a lot of glass, and there are often conventions as to what a campus is supposed to look like, and they will reject CEPTED principles because it doesn't fit into the design of the campus, and that's the challenge. So it's kind of back to what Jeff said with politics. That does become the challenge. But I'm a big believer in CEPTED. And it's proven that it works, and those design elements can be involved. You have to be in at the beginning, though, of like a new building, a new school. You have to be involved early on in the planning stages before they start putting, tying the money down to what they're actually going to construct.
Does anyone answer or just explain what CEPTED is for our participants that are not familiar with that approach?
All right, that's crime prevention through environmental design. So It's exactly that. And they did it at Sandy Hook, in fact. They rebuilt that school completely from the ground up and incorporated a lot of those principles. So it's all about natural ingress and egress barriers, things that people then claim for their own ownership and whatnot. And it does pay huge dividends.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say is, one of the things that we noticed, and Bob mentioned NIMS before, and NIMS has come up a couple of times. NIMS put out some protocols years ago that said, look, at your school building, please letter and number every door, right? And again, there's a procedure to do it. And I can tell you about 20%, only 20% of the school buildings that I visit have letters and numbers on their doors. So, time is lives. So when a rescue or a police officer is trying to find the right location, if you have the ability to tell them door A5 or door D1, that has value, and it's ignored across the country.
Yeah, no, it was, on that note, in the SEPTA note. So next month, our conversation in November is all about building design for school safety. So we're going to be diving right into that. We've got two architects that focus on designing safe schools and architecting safe schools from a design perspective. But that, once again, that's part of a holistic approach. You need to take all these factors into consideration. So let me just take a couple questions here from the registrants. Vivian Campbell from Georgia Tech asks, and then this goes back to the whole political aspect, but any tips from getting buy-in from department heads and various members of executive leadership regarding resources and responses? I mean, this is obviously a recurring theme, and that seems to, that clearly this has come up several times today. So we just can't get the buy-in from leadership. What did you say before, Jeff? Believe me, or what was the term? I mean, I'm not sure what the.
Well, again, the college space is a different dynamic because everyone, they're not quote unquote embedded, right? The professors and all that, but that's much more difficult. Again, it goes by leadership. If the leadership buys in, the president of the college or university, and I would ask Bob for his comments, but if the president of the college goes to a meeting and, all the chancellors go to the meeting and the schools, the college police chief goes to the meeting and you invite in everyone and you do something, to draw them in, I mean, I think there's value there. But again, again, we see it in the K-12 space, which is what I deal with specifically is, again, if the superintendent, leadership is the key. If leadership buys in and dedicates some time and funding and efforts, space to get this training done. I mean, we've talked about FERDIS before. Indian River State College has a training program for future teachers. So the first time they see an emergency is not the first time they see an emergency, right? Hugely successful. It should be a model for teachers at every teaching college across the USA.
And to your point, Jeff, we're working with ZeroNow. We're working with the ASA Superintendent Association to really get that buy-in and support in the knowledge transfer from an executive level. This is what school safety looks like. Here's what you need to be thinking about, because it can be overwhelming. There's so much information out there. There's so many resources, but it can be overwhelming. Bob, you had a comment.
All right, there is when I teach for Texas A&M for TEACS, which is their engineering extension service, and there's a document from 2007 from the Society for College and University Planning that is written by presidents and provosts for presidents and provosts, called The Presidential Role in Disaster Planning and Response, Lessons from the Front. And it's from people in higher ed who've experienced emergencies. And it's a white paper, it's about 7 pages long, that basically says, get in up front before it happens, because if it's after the fact, you're behind the 8 ball. So it's just a document that I recommend, and it's available online. You can Google that.
Yeah, it's too late. So this, Kirk, this will ask you. So, we're talking about school collaboration, school response, and all that. Is there a difference in emergency response collaboration with churches, houses of worship, synagogues, or is there anything unique about school response compared to churches, houses of worship?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely not, right? It's still about, there's an unplanned event, a natural disaster, an active shooter. You're going to have casualties. There's going to be chaos. any jurisdiction, whether you're a municipality, a county, or state, or everything in between, those big events, right? Again, because of the complexity of the U.S. market, there's so many different agencies that mutual aid, that comms piece, what's your hospital infrastructure, where's mass casualty, relocation sites, like, again, when Jeff and Bob have talked about, like, there's no shortages of resources, and it's not like you have a blank slate to go figure out. Like, there's components within Homeland Security at the state level, at the county municipal level, collectively building these capabilities out and just having that thought process. It is not just unique to schools. It's a problem here in the U.S. There's some countries overseas dealing with the same thing, but it's really a U.S. challenge right now, is working through that piece of it.
Right, and obviously you have a lot of experience, on the international front and looking at the various dynamics. We have just a couple more minutes here, a couple more questions. So Daniel asks about the, and this I'll direct to Jeff. It goes back to technology. So what is the importance of early and accurate communication when an incident is occurring? Early and accurate, because we're always talking about, the time and how can technology help with this? I know, Jeff, you kind of summarized this earlier, but just want to address that question specifically.
Well, quickly, I mean, we're seeing it across the USA. Not so much. It's actually calmed down, which I'm quite happy about. The swatting, right? We've seen the phony 911 calls. Swatting seems to have calmed down a little bit. But if you take a swatting call, if you have instant eyes, if you will, into a school, and you have instant communications via walkie-talkie or communications, or you can see inside the school where people aren't running around, so forth and so on, you can quickly dispel a swatting incident. So I have to tell you that if you don't have communications in the first 30 to 60 seconds, your policy could be considered a failure.
Indeed. So we just have a couple more minutes. I'd love to give you each an opportunity to just share your final thoughts and words of wisdom for our participants on things they should be considering, because once again, it's we've got the challenge that we have a lot of folks that just don't know what they don't know yet, and taking this knowledge transfer, this expertise that you're sharing. The whole our mantra at ZeroNow is together we'll make school safer for good. So sharing your thoughts, your insights with our participants, and having our participants, if you're interested in being a part of the conversation, please keep an eye out. But Bob, any final thoughts or words of wisdom for our participants?
Just, I know you're up against the clock with other agendas. We're talking about education. They have things they have to accomplish in a given year. So don't make this too long. They need things in small bites. So package your material and deliver it to them to teach them and educate the people involved in your community in small bites so they can easily digest it, and maybe do that throughout the year. I love the idea about having regular, meeting monthly or so with your stakeholders to kind of remind them about what's happening around the country and talk about issues.
And Bob, you actually that's a very good point about getting things boiled down and simplified. And so one of the initiatives that we're working on right now with ZeroNow is the Path to Zero, which is basically it's distilling down all the major. I wish I had a visual here, but distilling all of the core tenets of when it comes to school safety, everything from having an assessment done, understanding where your gaps are, looking at funding sources, things that all exist, everything that exists on schoolsafety.gov, like Jeff mentioned, but just distilling it down. So here, if you're a school administrator, here's what you need to know about funding. 3 basic things. If you're a school administrator, here are 3 things that you need to know about prevention, because there are 300 things that you can learn about. I think you all said today, there's an abundance of resources out there, but can we distill those down to the core essence of what you need to know to get started? Because if there's too many things to do, you just can't get started. You're paralyzed. Kirk, final thoughts or words of wisdom from you, sir?
And you kind of touched on it, you're not alone, right? There's so many people passionate about this, but I do think there's value in, given your jurisdiction or whatever school district you're at, staying, engaged with local news. And when there's a local event, maybe reaching out once it's settled, but reaching out to your counterpart, lessons learned, and then sharing that back to your district and keeping it fresh and top of mind for people with real, tangible, relevant information. just so they're always kind of not overwhelming, not too frequently, but at least thinking about it, because it's going to hit a string for anyone. And so trying to keep them engaged with, real world examples and benefits. But again, leverage all the resources that are out there. There is absolutely no shortage of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kirk. And Mr. Kelly, final words of wisdom from you, sir.
Well, I'm going to show my age here a little bit. The famous Tip O'Neill said, years ago that all politics is local, right? So if you use that mantra in the K-12 space, if you want activity, no one scares the school board, principals, police chief more than the local PTO or PTA. Engage your PTO and PTA, and there's a dozen questions that I've published. There are 12 questions that every school PTA, every parent should be asking their administration about the safety and security of their children when the school has them for a good 6, 7, 8 hours every day. We're more than happy to share that with them. It has nothing to do with me selling anything, and just has to do with simple questions that should be answered in a timely fashion. So again, I hope that the people that are watching this engage with their community, engage with the school to see what the policies and procedures are to keep their children as safe as can be.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Kirk. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise and insights with our participants. And we'll see you on the online community in just a couple of minutes. And please log in. And somebody asked about your contact information. We'll get that to you as well. So thanks, everybody. Take care.